Now let's talk a little bit about internal controls. Now right off the bat, you could think of internal controls as paper controls. And what I mean by that is they're usually comprised of written policies and procedures and practices. Now granted that if it is a policy, that does certainly sound like a paper version of a control, whereas procedures and practices may be steps, documentations that outline how you should work with certain controls. So you can make a linkage to an actual physical control. But generally, as we're looking at it here, it is ways in which we should go about doing those particular types of practices or procedures when implementing a specific control. Now, I also realize that when we say control, we're being very vague. And that is purposeful, because you're not going to be tested on specific types of controls. In other words, you're not going to be asked to be a firewall specialist or to understand proxy services or to have the fundamental ins and outs of Windows security, those types of things, but rather to have the overall idea of what controls are. And in the term of what we're looking at as far as, as an auditor, and we look at these controls, we have to remember they're designed to provide some reasonable assurance that you're still meeting the business needs, the business objectives, while also trying to achieve the lowest amount of risk that you can, which is the purpose of a lot of these controls. In other words, you should be asking the questions, what should be achieved and what should be avoided when we're looking at how these controls are applied. Now, there are several objectives with internal controls. We could have internal accounting controls that deal with the fiduciary responsibilities of those people involved with any part of that aspect of an organization when it comes to financial matters. We have operational controls, which, as they sound, would maybe be part of the procedures and practices as far as how we should go about working with any particular control that we've installed into our corporation for the purpose of lowering risk. And, of course, administrative controls. And again, there we get into things like our standard operating procedures, getting into our policies, having documentation about what the goal of the company is going to be, what is expected of the people that are working for them, maybe even disciplinary actions as far as what happens if you go outside or violate any of these controls. But those are the objectives, anyway, of what we're trying to see with internal controls. And certainly we're calling them internal because these are ones developed internally within our organization for the use of the people that are working inside the organization to follow. Now, if we specifically talk about IS controls, we'll look at those objectives. And these types of internal controls should be addressed in a manner that's relevant to and IS-related processes. In other words, these controls were designed as specifically for information services. So we would have controls that we would outline that would talk about safeguarding assets, whether that safeguarding deals with physical security or with encryption standards or communication, remote access. We should have controls that ensure the integrity of the operating systems. There you could maybe even make a case for your antivirus, your spyware, to make sure that an operating system hasn't been corrupted or infected. To ensure the integrity of sensitive and critical applications through the use of controls like authorization, which are, of course, are the permissions that users are allowed to have or different objects can have. Validation. Validation is very important when it comes to making sure the information is entered in correctly. That goes kind of hand in hand with accuracy and completeness. And I've certainly been around companies where, as a result of looking at some of their data, I remember one law enforcement agency where the accuracy and completeness was just horrendous when you start looking it up. In other words, with issues like if you were looking up some name in a arrest database, we need to look at controls for reliability and accuracy as well of the information that we're working with, or of whatever if it's not just information, reliability could be for the performance of network traffic, being able to flow smoothly across the network. Accuracy as well kind of goes back into making sure the information that we see is appropriate. It could be accuracy in firewall policies. There's a lot of different things that we see with these control objectives, and again, by just that kind of quick variety I gave you, you can see why it's purposely vague as far as trying to tell you what the goal of these controls are. Now, controls can be categorized into a series of classifications. They're often considered some controls as preventive, some as detective, and some as corrective. Okay, so preventive controls. Now, think about this. Controls are more than just devices that I put out onto the network or software that's running. I could make a case that a preventive control for my IS department is having the magnetic key lock that keeps people from getting into the server room without having a proper type of identification and access card to get in. It's preventing them from getting in and maybe stealing or destroying equipment. Detective controls. I could make the same argument if I just want to stick on that physical security type of control for IS. Could be the closed circuit TVs to be able to watch and see what people are doing, or to record their entrance and exit out of the particular server rooms. It could be a detective control as far as the operating system, as I mentioned with antivirus software. Corrective, of course, would be controls that were designed to repair some of the issues that we've seen that go on. And all of these, again, are ways to classify what or categorize, I should say, what a control was designed to do. So as we look at some of the control objectives, some of the other objectives might be things like the proper identification and authentication of users. Well, that gets us into that authorization and authentication, sometimes what we call the AAA. The other A being accountability. Efficiency and effectiveness of operations is another objective of a control. Another one is to make sure that there's compliance with user requirements, to organizational policies and procedures. Now, it's an important aspect, right? Because when we create policies and procedures, we tell the users what we expect of them, what's acceptable, and we have to have ways to make sure that they're in compliance with that. The construction of a business continuity plan is certainly a good control, one that we'll take a look at in other sections. The business continuity plan, though, is a way of maintaining that high availability should any type of outage or interruption come in. It could even get to the point where we talk about the disaster recovery plan, whether it's a disaster because of nature types of incidents, earthquakes, tornadoes, that type of thing, a disaster from actual malicious attacks. It could be a disaster from a gross error of a user, maybe wiping out a whole database. Lots of things that we have to have recovery plans for. That's another type of control. And of course, with things like business continuity, disaster recovery, more than likely that's for something very specific that has occurred to cause a big outage, and we need to have another control like an incident response plan that says, okay, when these types of things happen, we have to have a team, a list of people who are ready to go out and take up certain responsibilities in a pre-planned or pre-orchestrated manner to try to recover from these incidences. So again, all of these are types of controls which I try to use examples that were not just, firewall and VPN concentrator and some of those typical security devices that a lot of us, kind of focus on sometimes whenever we talk about information systems.